Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. We are witnessing the rise of a new secular religion, and it's called wokeism. At the moment in its short history, its goal is to end racism. Why? Well, everything is now considered racist. The believers in this cult demand obedience and self-criticism. But we're really never told how racism is to be eradicated or how it helps serve the interests of working people of all colors. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by my guest, Jyoti Brar in Bristol. She is the deputy leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, as well as author of The Drive to War Against Russia and China. Her forthcoming book is Identity Politics in Class. And in Budapest, we have George Samueli. He is author of Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia. All right, Crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Okay, let's go to Bristol. Jyoti, what do you make of this new secular religion? Because it's kind of quasi Christian, a little bit of Catholicism, a little bit of it evangelist style, and it has all of its rituals. It has its hymns. It has its clergy. It has its scripture, and it's making everybody miserable. And it has nothing to do with fighting racism. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's the last point that I am really interested in. It's, do we want to fight racism? And of course, the answer for most of us is yes. But to fight racism, you have to understand, where does racism come from? What's the cause of racism? The symbols of an exploiting society do, of course, represent the fact that it is an exploitative society. What that reminds us is this society is not our society. It is made up of, run by, and for a tiny exploiting class. And of course, their heroes are the ones who are celebrated in the culture that they call ours, but which is really theirs. And of course, for the mass of the workers and exploited around the world, these people are not heroes. Okay? But it's a reminder of a material reality that we live in a world of exploiters and exploited. And that is what is the cause of racism. Racism comes from the need to divide workers against one another. It comes from the need of the imperialists in particular to justify their wars and their colonial conquests on the basis that these people can't take care of their own business. They're not grown up. They're not, the way that the wars and colonial exploits have been justified have subtly developed over the years, but essentially come back to the same thing. We have this white man's burden to take care of everybody else, but it's not really about white and black, is it? You don't have to be white to be racist. You don't have to be black to be a victim of racism. The Europeans were conducting pogroms against the Jews before they ever saw a black person. The British were conducting pogroms against the Irish before they ever had African, Caribbean and Indians, to be racist against, before they had the EU citizens to be racist against, which has been our most recent target. And of course, the Arabs in between, because we're waging war all over the Middle East. So for me, this is somewhat of a diversion. I'm happy to see the back of the statues, but if it just is a question of looking at statues and taking them away, whilst doing nothing about the roots, the systemic...
What does it change? George, exactly.
It's like a massive diversion, isn't it?
Well, that's how I see it all, okay? I am all for to address social inequities, absolutely, okay? But, George, this whole movement, it's anchored in the present. There is any past is adulterated, it's dirty, it's toxic, and it must be wiped away. I mean, how can we address inequality and inequities without knowing the structural process that created it in the first place? And that's all in history, okay? And as far as, seeing the back of statues, that's a totally different question. And I think that we should talk about that. I think we should talk about what statues mean. But this is the Talibanization of Western culture. If you don't like it, you don't understand it, you destroy it. Go ahead, George.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, the taking down of statues is a process that's only just begun, because it isn't going to stop with Robert E. Lee, because Next up, obviously, the founding fathers, Washington and Jefferson. Well, they were slave owners. Woodrow Wilson, retrograde views on blacks. FDR, Japanese Americans.
And Winston Churchill's currently in a box.
Exactly. So, Winston Churchill, who has been an icon in pretty much, throughout Europe, in the United States, since his death, more than 50 years ago, is now a reviled figure because he's an imperialist. So everything else that he has done, he's the wartime leader, everything gets forgotten. He's just an imperialist. But why we know that this is a fraud is that if you really want to oppose imperialism, if you really want to oppose rich, powerful countries exerting their will on weak countries which are non-European, non-white, then oppose what the United States, the United Kingdom, and France, the imperial powers, are doing to Syria right now. I mean, they're inflicting the most brutal, horrific sanctions and causing utter misery there. Oppose what they did in Libya, destroy the perfectly well-governed state for God knows what reason, and now this is a country in which they've reintroduced slavery. So now there's a country where you actually ongoing slave trade, not the transatlantic slave trade from 400 years ago, but an ongoing slave trade in Libya. Again, not silence about that. Or the Russia, that's the sanctions against Venezuela. Again, Latin American country. These non-white people. Again, nothing about that. So what then is the purpose of refighting battles from 150, 200?
I think I know the answer to that. And let's go back to Bristol. Jonty, I know the answer to that, and you alluded to it, is that the elites here do not want to talk about class. That's like kryptonite to these people. They don't want to talk. It's all because of racism. It's not because of class. And that way, that is actually a very soothing, comforting thing, because having these purity tests that you apply to people, get on your knee, take the knee, and all these other things. You don't address the structural problems of why there is racism and why there is poverty and why there's growing desperation. I mean, the phrase was attributed to George Floyd, but I think it is applied to at least half the United States. I can't breathe. And it's because of the structural inequalities that have been built in, and we have all of these woke people. That makes them feel privileged, even though they don't know anything about history. They don't understand exploitation. They don't even know that they're being exploited. Go ahead.
I mean, 100%. There's so many points there in what you said I could pick up on. That symbol that resonated with people so much about George Floyd's death, it wasn't just that it was another police murder. The way that it was filmed, so we could see the cold-blooded nature of his killer. He was so calm. The knee to the neck and the words of the dying man, I can't breathe. You don't have to be black for that to resonate with you. That resonated across the world because that is the experience of the oppressed and exploited masses everywhere. They can't breathe. They have the knee on the neck from imperialism daily, hourly, throughout their lives for them and their children, and they can't breathe. And that's what really resonated. And that's why it is, as you say, about class and the system, and not about purely black and white and racism and police violence in America, although of course those things are symptomatic of the inequalities. But really, why has it exploded now in such a way? It's not only the power of this particular murder, it's also the fact that it's come on top of, as you say, a situation where the economic crash, which is the biggest that capitalism has ever produced, combined with the health crisis, are being disproportionately, as always, felt by the poorest. And of course, the poorest in the imperialist countries are more likely to be black. If you're black, you're more likely to be poor. Right? So that desperation that's coming from people losing their jobs, having no healthcare, suffering from the crisis the most, suffering most from the health epidemic, and being in the middle of all of this. And of course, it's very safe for our rulers to see this uprising, and they're scared. And what they don't want is us to get together and say, this system is a problem and we must get rid of it. So what they are very happy to do is jump on a narrative that encourages sections of the working class to despise one another and spend their time and their energy fighting one another. And we are being made absolute fools out of on both sides of this argument. I mean, we saw in London this weekend working class white guys doing like literally Hitler salutes past Churchill's statue. You couldn't make it up, in their attempt to defend what they see as their culture. It's not their culture. On the other hand, you've got, they're being pitted against, angry working class Black and Asian people who are feeling like they've had enough of the inequalities in the system. Both sides of there are suffering from the inequities of this system and its inability to provide basic security in really simple things like jobs, housing, healthcare, education. It's the rulers who benefit from all of this diversion and this putting us down into silos of what color are you and our oppression hierarchy. The blacker you are, the more oppressed you are, the more kind of just you are.
Victimology, right. George, one of the things I find really quite sickening is that you have the Amazons and you have Silicon Valley and, they'll put on their website Black Lives Matter. And you know what? That is pure genuflection and it's at no cost to them whatsoever. It doesn't affect their bottom line. It's an amazing cultural cover for them because if Amazon actually cares about Black lives, then why does it treat its workers like serfs, okay? No, Jeff Bezos gets a free card out of jail because he can say, he takes the knee. But it doesn't affect his bottom line. As a matter of fact, he's become even more fabulously rich during this crisis. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, exactly. And so what has happened is that this whole Black Lives Matter movement has been co-opted by Jeff Bezos and all these other fat cats in Silicon Valley, to whom this is just pure symbolism. I mean, if Bezos really cared about Black lives, he could, well, for one thing, raise the wages of all the people who work for him. He doesn't do that. He could permit union organizing at his workplaces. He doesn't permit that. Same goes for Jamie Dimon. Same goes for all of these Silicon Valley billionaires. They're not going to permit union organizing. So all of the things that would actually affect their bottom line, they don't do. And what do then? They actually use this Black Lives to show their superiority to their workforce, because it's their workforce that is racist, not them. We're the CEOs, we're billionaires, we're not racist, but you miserable blighters, who barely can make your rent payment, you are racist. And I will show you how terribly retrograde you are. And so this is the kind of the game that they played. So there's really nothing radical about this, because we know what's radical. We know what a radical movement is. A radical movement is what you had with the Bolsheviks. You had masses of support. They would direct appeal to the masses, directly appealing to them.
We're going to go to a break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on wokeism. Stay with us. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter LaBelle. To remind you, we're discussing wokeism. Okay, let me go back to George. Right before the break, you were making a point. But what I think is really interesting in all this is that among conservatives and people that are more interested in class, like our guest in Bristol, I hear their refrain, and it really makes me worry. They say, I'm not really interested in this. But the problem is that wokeism is interested in you, and they're coming for you. Go ahead, George.
Yes, absolutely. Because what happens at workplaces of Jamie Dimon and the workplaces of Jeff Bezos is that white workers and Black workers are set against each other. How does that happen? Well, because whites can always be held to be racist and to be have all kinds of backward views on things. So you can have this constant tussle between the white workers and Black workers over supposed racism, rather than over the fact that both of them collect almost no pay, work horrific hours in appalling work conditions, and all of the money is being siphoned off to the people at the top. I mean, it's no accident that Bezos is fabulously wealthy. You know, he's worth more than 100 billion, while his workers can barely pay the rent.
They argue about these statues, and I've seen a lot of historical artifacts of people that a statue to an abolitionist, okay, and they don't even know who it is. But it's a statue of apparently of a white god, okay. And this is how insane it is. Jyoti, let me go back to you. One of the things I find really terrifying in this is that, first of all, this whole wokeism movement, detaches itself from the rule of law. It detaches itself from merit, I would say. It detaches itself from of being reasonable. You can't argue with these people. It's like, arguing with a flat earther, okay? And the problem is, as I see, is this divisions that are artificially created to set us against each other, is that where is the limit? See, if you take the knee or you lay on your stomach and you put your hands behind your back, and they want more and more and more. And what this does is it creates an enormous amount of intimidation, a chilling effect. And again, it gets away from the very core basic ideas that we're trying to get across on this program. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, if we want to understand where this woke culture, as you describe it, identity politics, where it's come from, it's really something which has jumped into a space that was left by a retreating class-conscious working class movement. My lifetime has been a lifetime of seeing that movement, the working class in retreat. The socialist countries were destroyed. To my mind, it's all temporary, but, history goes up and down, right? In these last 40 years, we've seen a retreat of working class forces, and into the space, these were working class demands: equality for women, end of racism, end of colonialism, end of imperialism. They were working class demands, and they still are. But what's happened is, with the retreat of a class-conscious leadership for the working class, you've had the academization of these struggles, and they've been transformed. They've been put into separate silos, so you no longer recognize that women's liberation is a class question, that anti-racism is a class question, that anti-imperialism is about class, it's about the system of capitalism as well as imperialism. You put them into separate silos, and we've had this kind of bourgeoisification, if you like, of working class demands. They've become things that you study at university, women's studies, and the enemy is men, and Black studies, and the enemy is white people, and it's a wonderful, safe narrative for imperialism. But this thing with the statues as well, why it's being pushed so hard by our media, and they're very much in support of a debate over statues, because we can all discuss history, and imperialist crimes become something, as George said, something from the past. But imperialism is in existence right now, and its crimes are worse than ever. Look at the PlayStation wars in Congo that have been fought in the last 15 years. How many millions have died so we can play our PlayStations? Why are we not on the streets saying Congolese lives matter? Well, we're at home with our PlayStations, ignoring it. The absolute inability of our rulers in this crisis to provide healthcare for everybody. That should have everyone in the street.
Well, I mean, but that's it. But there's such a vacuum of leadership. I mean, our leaders are the worst in my lifetime, but bar none. I mean, it's absolutely. Because they're all bought off. Okay, they serve a purpose here. George, one of the things I find very disheartening is that if you really look what's happened with the academy and how academia has flowed into the culture, now into our politics here. I mean, this is a real boon for the studies people, because to fight racism, Black Lives Matter, wokeism, you need an equity counselor, you need a diversity counselor, you need a diversity chief in this department. And you know what? All those worthless degrees that have been earned over the last 30 years, there's upward mobility there. But what they do is they're taking this paradigm and they're just reinforcing all of the problems we have discussed here. And it feels so great, doesn't it? If you're the one it's pointing, if you're a priest or a priestess in this church, you're elevated, okay? I mean, this reminds me of, the kids that work for Pol Pot, sit down, get on your knees, and it's terrifying. And you know what? People are submitting to it. This is extraordinary moment. Go ahead, George.
Yes, exactly. So what you're now creating, and have obviously been creating it for some time, is a vast administrative class, entirely parasitical, that will be yet another boot on the neck of the workers, because they will be there at every workplace to point fingers at employees who, as we agreed, are barely able to make a living, that you are a terrible retrograde person. You have terrible views on women. You have terrible views on blacks. You have terrible views on homosexuals. And you need to be re-educated. We, however, we have university degrees. We're doing very nicely. Thank you very much. So it'll be yet another burden on people who are already burdened. And of course, that's why Jamie Dimon and the rest of them are so happy with this. Great. Our workers will be even more miserable because they will constantly be up in the human resources office told what terrible people they are and how they must be re-educated. So yeah, that's exactly.
If we use this paradigm, then it is to their advantage, this managerial professional class that have all these worthless degrees and high esteem about themselves. Racism will never end because that's their job, okay? To ever, it was like in the Soviet Union, to ever perfect socialism. It's already perfect. We're going to ever perfect it even more. They have no initiative to see this kind of cultural terrorism to come to an end. And if they do, they'll just find another one. It'll be sexism or something like that. Go ahead.
Yes. No, exactly.
I'm going to talk to you.
I'm sorry. Okay.
No worries. Yes, I think George has really put his finger on something extremely important about all of this discourse and the constant substitution of the policing of language and symbols, but language in particular. When you're policing language to the extent that the Identity Politics Brigade police language, what you're doing is shutting people out of the conversation. What you're doing is telling working class people, you better not open your mouth because you might use the wrong word. I come from I don't even know how to call it. My dad is Indian, my mum is English, right? So I come from a mixed background. And through my lifetime, the way people describe that has changed and these days it changes so fast, I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Right? Mixed race doesn't make sense to me because I think we're all human race, right? But to explain to somebody else, they get offended on my behalf. I use the wrong word, right? What does it have to do with anything? It's nothing. And we're being encouraged into smaller and smaller boxes. You can only talk to somebody who has the exact same experience as you. I've got to find, a half Punjabi Hemel Hempstead girl who was born in 1972. I can be with her, and other people, they can't understand my experience. So we'll all be, we can maybe be allies, but really you won't get my experience and I won't get yours. And it's perfect for the ruling class because we can never, ever unite. We're all in our tiny little boxes, fragmenting ever more. And, everybody else is the enemy. Everything, you become a kind of professional navel gazer, me and my experience, my pain. Fundamentally, none of this changes the system, as you said. It encourages more privileged, better educated workers to despise the ones who don't have their education in the right words. Keeps the poorer workers out of politics and discussion altogether until they just get angry because they had enough of being despised, and they can feel that it's nonsense, but they don't have the leadership to explain to them how and why it's nonsense. And fundamentally, we're all just pitted against each other, wasting our time and our energy, while the ruling class is pushing us all down and down and down.
It's really interesting. There was some wildcat strikes, George, with Amazon, and there was, I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name. He was trying to organize the workers, and he happened to be African-American. And I know you saw some interviews with him, and Amazon said that he was let go because he broke social distancing, and he's not very articulate, which I thought was so amazing because I watched the interviews with him. He was very articulate to me. It was because he was articulate. That's what they were afraid of. Go ahead, George.
Yes, exactly. Because of course, what Amazon Jamie Dimon and the rest of them are afraid of is a serious left that is organizing among the workers.
Serious left. That is the key two words. So I keep going.
Exactly. And that's what you had, which were the serious socialist revolution? Well, the serious socialist revolution was Russia. And what did they do? They organized among the working class, and they precisely said to not let the capitalists pit you against one another. That's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to pit you against one another, tell you that he's the enemy, not us, he's the enemy. And that's what you do. That's how you organize the left. But now that the left has embraced identity politics, all with the blessing of the richest men in the world, then there is really no left. And there is no serious or radical movement. And so we have this empty symbolism of taking down statues, which, as we've said earlier, does nothing to improve anyone's lives. Okay, the statue's gone. Now get back to work and at your minimum wage. So this then is the result of a complete sort of defanging of a serious left.
Okay, we've run out of time here. This was a fascinating discussion. We're going to keep doing it with both of you, okay, because I really think it's important for our viewers here. That's all the time we have. I want to thank my guests in Budapest and in Bristol, and I want to thank our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. Remember, Crosstalk News.